Good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia Yokom. I'm a fifth-year landscape architecture student and a first-year graduate student. The thesis presentation I will be showing you today is on the topic of hospital campus gardens and therapeutic spaces. Why did I choose this topic for my thesis? Well, it started with these two. I get to call them my parents. In 2016, my dad started to not feel well, making many trips to the Fargo hospitals on and off that year. Fast forwarding to 2018, the doctors found cancer in his liver, which progressed over the next year into 2019. He and my mom had to make many visits to the Fargo hospitals and then were recommended to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. During their stays, they noticed, because of my interest in landscape architecture, the many different landscapes, views from hospital rooms, and parks they could go to nearby when they had some downtime in between appointments. When they were home, they would tell me all about it, and my mom would show me the pictures that she took and how those spaces were nice getaways for them in a very hard time of chemo, radiation, surgeries, and so on. Sadly, in May of 2019, my dad passed away from liver cancer after being too sick to receive a liver transplant. When talking about having to pick a topic for my thesis, this was the first thing that popped into my parents' head, something that may have seemed small to some, but was a great asset to them for their time spent in those hospitals. Since my dad made a point to show this was important to him and my mom, then it only made sense to pursue this project topic. So what is a healing garden and therapeutic space? The University of Minnesota says, healing gardens are most often applied to green spaces in hospitals and other healthcare facilities that specifically aim to improve health outcomes, a place of refuge, and promotes healing in patients, families, and staff. This definition helps me form the question from a landscape architect standpoint of how can a landscape architect create a network of hospital campus gardens inspired by the native prairies of the upper Midwest region and picturesque landscapes of Europe that promote healing to the site, the patients, and the caregivers. I will get into how those specifics come about further in the presentation. To continue, though, the goal for the question would have to be the success and values of the health facilities come from the architecture, medicine, and medical staff. To transfer those ideals into the landscape around it is what makes the entire experience of a hospital memorable, welcoming, and desired. Through visibility, accessibility, comfort, quiet, relaxation, distraction, connection, healing, and activities, I wish to promote the just mentioned paragraph. You should be able to see those throughout the presentation in the forms of research, inventory and analysis, performance and programming, master and conceptual plans, and sections and perspectives. The research. Mixed method research was done with the lead questions of what is a healing garden and why is it important? How were they historically successful? Why are there so few, if any, in the Fargo area? I was able to find descriptive and comparative case studies such as Horatio's Garden and Maggie Keswick-Jing's Cancer Caring Center in Europe and the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. A user preference survey for the hospital project site in Fargo, North Dakota was created for once I decided on a project site it could be sent out for a potentially accurate design. The user preference survey. For the user preference survey, I came up with 20 questions focused on the answers of staff and visitors. Some of these questions were, are the hospital grounds important for you? What do you think is the most pleasing feature of a garden? What season do you prefer to be outside? What activities would you do or like to do when in a garden or outdoor space? And what improvements would you make in a new garden compared to the current one? I had a decent response to the survey, with many agreeing that the hospitals could use some more outdoor spaces or more activities and events to showcase the landscape. These images are ones I uploaded to the survey and asked which one did they like the most. Number 4 being the least, and number 1 being the most. Site orientation. I was able to narrow the site down to the Sanford Medical Center in Fargo, North Dakota, as it was the most becoming selection out of the rest. To show where this hospital is on the map, we have the white square and the orange dotted circle to show the area the hospital is located in. It is based on 23rd Avenue South, right off of Veterans Boulevard in Fargo. You can get to these streets by use of Interstate I-94, which then intersects with Interstate I-29 further east of the site. To show a more broad orientation, the site is located in the upper Midwest region, Fargo being located on the most eastern side of North Dakota. Some highlights of the city would be the downtown area and the Red River adjacent to that. Though my site isn't directly in contact with those highlights, it will hopefully be one after the designing upon it through a landscape architecture perspective. The project site. As mentioned previously, the project site is the Sanford Medical Center in Fargo, North Dakota. It is one of the 8 major hospitals in the city, such as the Sanford Children's Hospital, Essentia Medical Center, Fargo Heart Clinic, Prairie St. John's, SCCI Hospitals, Essentia Health, Vibra Health, and lastly the Sanford Medical Center. The Sanford Medical Center was started to be constructed in 2013 and was finished in 2017, which was then opened to the public. The 274-foot building has 11 stories in total, with only 10 visible from the outside. The Sanford hospitals have a mission and values they set forth for all of their hospitals. The set values of family, service, community, and advancement from their list will help strengthen the landscape design as to make sure those hospital values are transferred into the landscape. The site tour. After choosing this hospital as my project site, I was able to make a number of tours in order to understand what the hospital was wanting to provide its users, not only in healthcare, but in the designer side of architecture, views, and landscape. Some of these views would be the north side, the helicopter pad, front entrance, lobby view, 2 courtyard views, and then the 10th floor. There are many pictures I took throughout my tours, but I felt these would help you understand from where my design ideas would come from, where the most important views would be, and what assets the existing site has that I might want to enhance or change. Site analysis. The project site is a property made up of 39 total acres. The combined building footprints come out to about 6 acres, that being the main building and the large utility building to the northwest side of the hospital. Something that stuck out to me when doing the inventory and analysis is the large amount of flat roof space that could potentially be used for designing, coming in at about 1.2 acres. The landscape has about 500 trees that are deciduous and evergreens and about 50 or so combined planting beds. Taking that analysis and calculating the amount of turf, the total landscape space comes in at about 12 acres of the 39 total acres. The grounds are 85% permeable with 2-foot contours, with soil that is mainly clay, which can have poor to very poor drainage. As mentioned previously, the building is 11 stories, level 1 being the basement meant for staff only and selected guests, to the more public levels of 1 through 3 and 5 through 10, as the 4th level is mainly mechanical. The main building is in total 1 million square feet, 274 feet tall, has 284 hospital beds, has 96 that can be used in the future, 28 operating rooms, 10 shelled operating rooms for the future use, and 51 emergency bays, and 3,600 embeds exterior windows. There are 23 visible locations of crosswalks on the site that help make up the hardscape of about 21 acres. This also includes 60 storm drains, 20 acres of parking lot, 1,560 parking spaces, a combined total of 27 miles in sidewalks, 1 main emergency route, 1 main route for public use, 1 bike route that is unmarked as it is a sidewalk, and 1 bus route through MAP Bus, which has 2 designated stops, D and I. There is much connected context of apartments, hotels, banks, gas stations, fast food, and more. Keeping the landscape as the main focus, the surrounding context is still important and can drive the design. Programming and performance. From the results of the inventory and analysis, I was able to find 3 main opportunities in order to create 10 spaces around the hospital. 1. Broken circulation with site elements. 2. Underdeveloped landscapes, mainly around the hospital. 3. Heavy weather elements from the northwest or southeast of the building, and 3/4 of the hospital building being in constant shade. In order to combat those, I was able to come up with 10 spaces, and those 10 spaces come out to be a shelter belt space, something that is very much known to North Dakota, a space for large amounts of circulation from the parking lots, but also sheltered on top of the shelter belt and vehicle circulation, maybe give it a woodland theme, a space that can connect one with the North Dakota theme of the prairies, a little bit more formal perhaps, but with mode paths to connect the previous space with further circulation. A space that connects to the elongated circulation, but also the circulation from the hospital directly from the employee entrance and exit. It'll have more of a courtyard, formal in nature theme. A space to add some educational purposes in the landscape, with a rain garden type design as to give the parking lot something on the inner circle amongst the outer circle design thus far. A space that shouts, "Welcome, please enjoy the grand building," but also the landscape leading up to it, which would be framing the entrance as well. Something similar to grand mansions, castles, and the like. A space that highlights the other side of the shelter belt again, but with much color besides green. Rows of springtime blooming trees, creating an alley for the east side of the site, something similar to this picture here. A space that enhances the already existing courtyard space from the public spaces of the hospital, creating rooms within spaces for the users of the site to enjoy. A space that takes up the large amount of flat roof space that people might be able to access in person or see from their windows, to have a landscape to view versus parking lot or interstate. And lastly, a space that connects the property as a whole to its surrounding context, to make the whole area feel like a campus versus many unconnected spaces, a design with low maintenance but ties into the design. Programming and performance. In order to make sure all of these spaces actually work with each other and the building, I created a 2D model and a 3D model in order to assess virtual size and realistic size. The main entrance and exit is vital to the site as it will have the most users and need the most connection for circulation and landscape framework. The employee entrance and exit is those users' way of coming and going from the building, how they start and end their day, so they need protection from the weather elements being on the northwest side of the building, but also some design features that make them enjoy their quick walks, lunches, events, etc. in their designated space. The existing courtyard is very minimal in size and substance, but connects to the dining centers for the public and employees to use on the southeast side of the building. This area needs to be a highlight of the design as to make sure that the public and employees can enjoy it through their use of outside time with, again, quick walks, eating a meal, reading a book, doing paperwork, etc. The flat roof space on the main building and the utility building have a large opportunity for views from many of the floors and views from outside the building as well. Seeing which of those spaces is safe, accessible, and designable will very much enhance the design as a whole. The emergency entrance and exits and the helicopter pad will be left alone as their main focus is to get patients, family, staff in and out as efficiently as possible, along with the emergency vehicles. Leaving their design as is the most important for that portion of the site. Here are a few images from the 3D model in highlight of the areas brought up on this slide. So with that comes the master plan. The master plan is broken up into 2 phases, and we'll be starting with phase 2, which is comprised of the Screen Avenue, Wanderer's Path, Prairie Lawns, the Rain Garden, Community Campus, and the Springtime Alley. These will all encompass the previous spaces I mentioned beforehand in the analysis of the performance and programming, and these were all given names as to make them become more alive when one is on the site. These will be much more in depth on design, but because of how large the site is, these need to be broken down into phases, and so on the next page we'll see phase 1, where my main design components will come out in this presentation. Phase 1, which encompasses the Rival Court, Points Plaza, Emerald Roofs, and the Cloister Garden. As I mentioned previously, these are the main components of this presentation for the design and will be highlighted in the next up and coming slides. Going back to the user preference survey, these are some of the answers to the other questions that I had responses to, just to show you some ideas and inspiration that I was getting throughout this whole process in order to tie into my original question of how can a landscape architecture promote the healing of the architecture to the landscape through the prairies of North Dakota and the picturesque landscapes of the European design gardens. And so some of the answers were the summer season, the fall season, clustered plant forms, which would be like groupings of plants, scattered plant forms, so multiple forms and shapes, flower color and form, flower and leaf smell, plant size, branch texture and form, flowering plants such as herbs and perennials. They would want to feel relaxed, connected with nature, they want to feel refreshed, and they'd love to see wood, concrete, and stone materials. With all of that, I was able to come up with the concept of modern-day Gothic architecture within a medieval landscape. From a yielding prairie of the Great Plains region to a monumental structure for healing and care, the Sanford Medical Center in Fargo, North Dakota was erected. Though the land it stands upon could no longer be used for crops and preservation, it could be used for an extension of healing, to be therapeutic to the people and the building utilizing it. A conservatory, courtyards, fountains, gardens with covered walking paths, and open lawns bring the healing and therapeutic spaces to life. With inspiration from the Gothic architecture, the landscape elements remind us that they are to be explored all times of the year, to be gathered in for social events, or to be experienced individually for peacefulness and a connection to nature. The landscape becomes an extension of the building with enclosed gardens and gathering spaces. Ornamental fencing, hedges, and differences in plantings creates rooms within rooms, from outdoor leading into indoor. All ages are to participate in the healing of children's play garden, secret gardens, strolling gardens, public courtyards, warm and exotic spaces when it is too cold to be outside, and experience these all around the main building. Touching, feeling, smelling, and seeing can bring all the joys of a naturalistic landscape and a formal landscape together with the influence to construct with the Middle Ages architecture. And so you'll be able to see that through the conceptual master plan. To bring you around the site, we'll start at the very top with the triple knot garden. This is meant to be utilized for privacy spaces covered in landscape plantings. Next is the prairie view garden to mimic the plantings of the prairie, so ornamental grasses, some evergreen trees, in a water feature in order to connect all of the parts of the landscape that you might see in North Dakota. Then I'll bring you to the Points Plaza courtyard, which is made up of 3 elements, which is the courtyard, the open lawn, and the strolling garden. This is on the northwest side of the hospital where I talked about the employee entrance and exit, to give them something to go out to and walk around, to enjoy all of the plantings, have events in an open lawn space, or go to the courtyard and enjoy a water feature with permanent and removable seating. Then that brings you over to the Starline Garden on top of the utility building, which is an ornamental green roof, which isn't accessible to the public, but would be accessible for maintenance. And that brings you over to the other side of the roofs with Secret Garden. So this would be accessible through the 4th floor. I'm proposing that it be accessible since it currently isn't. But for the sake of the design, I wanted it to be accessible for anybody and everybody to be able to enjoy under covered walking paths, water features, another privacy space for seating that is surrounded by landscape elements, and then 2 covered seating areas for when it is either raining, snowing, or needs some shade. And then we have a circle garden, a cross garden, and a fan garden that you would only be able to see from the windows on the 5th through the 10th floor, so that the people that aren't on the sides of the secret garden would also have something to look at. Then it brings you to the arrival court. You would be able to see this when you were coming or leaving the site when you go through the main entryway. This will be comprised of ornamental plantings, hedges, large canopy trees, and then some gardens around the Denny Sanford statue. Then that'll bring you over to the east side of the site with a strolling garden that's more formal, more public, and larger than the Points Plaza strolling garden. There is a children's play garden that I had mentioned previously where there would be more naturalistic play equipment versus plastic or concrete or something like that, which then is connected to the Elizabeth Cloister Garden, so another courtyard area with a large water feature with permanent and removable seating, and then a sunroom conservatory so that when it is negative 40 degrees outside, people can still utilize the landscape. But this one is just slightly more connected to the architecture as it is a building, but it would have ornamental plantings from warmer zones than North Dakota is in. And just to tie in with the rest of the design themes, I wanted to showcase some things that I've been picking up and looking at throughout this entire process. So one would be my structural palette, just to show you some of the ways that I would want people to experience my site, whether that be in open gathering spaces or covered spaces with vegetation, the materials that they would have in there, the pavers, what types of pavers, what colors of pavers, what patterns, what the conservatory would look like inside and out, and just the uses of the structural materials that would be implemented on the site. And the structural palette plays into the furnishings palette as well, with how those would interact with the water fountains. Do those have statues? Do they have little fountains within the fountains? How would I design those? So inspiration for that. I had mentioned the more naturalistic playground, and so more wood versus plastics or stone or anything like that, but still safe enough for kids to play on within the designated space I've given them. And then, seating, whether that be permanent or removable, along with planters, garbage cans, the ornamental fence that I had mentioned that you will be able to see in the upcoming perspectives that I have on the designated areas. And then some formal garden inspiration, whether that be, all the way back to Versailles or more modern, like in people's backyards and such like that. And the last of the palettes is the plant palette, which ranges of trees, shrubs, perennials, vines, and grasses. The trees and the shrubs are deciduous and evergreen, with the trees being those of birches, maples, crab apples, eastern redbuds, plum trees, and then on standard ornamental trees such as hydrangea and lilac. And then the evergreens are different varieties of arborvitae, and so that way you have year-round interest. You have different types of flowering and berries, and then you also have different types of barks as well. Over to the shrubs, you have boxwoods and arborvitaes to keep those green main colors for hedges and other things like that. And then for color and different texture, you have spirea, elderberry, and more lilac in order to create the large amount of spaces to be covered with plantings, but also have the beautiful colors that they get in the springtime, summer, and fall and into winter. And then for perennials, you have different varieties of coneflowers, you have yarrow, you have different varieties of daisies and lilies, and you have black-eyed Susans, delphinium, and then mainly on the ornamental rooftop, green rooftops, you will have different types of sedum. And then for the vines, you have clematis, wisteria, and English ivy. And then for the ornamental grasses, you have red October grass, Carl Forster, Elijah blue fescue, prairie dropseed, purple flame, and other varieties like that, which you will be all able to see throughout the perspectives I have of the upcoming design. So I will firstly bring you to the arrival court. In a section here, you can see how the very front entrance where people would be mainly walking around is for the main car pickup and drop off, or the main car and bus pickup or drop off. But as you can see how it is sectioned off from vehicle to pedestrian to ornamental plantings. And here's a perspective from inside the main planting bed in the front that you saw from the first perspective. Plantings in the shape of the Sanford logo, and then ornamental plantings to make it more specific and not so overgrown, so as people can still see the cars and the buses and everything, or people walking. And then it'll bring you over to Points Plaza. Here is a section of that whole side where you have, again, another patient pickup and drop off. You have the strolling garden, which is full of mass perennial and plantings with hedges. The employee entrance and exit path, open lawn space that is surrounded by hedges, the ornamental fence, and some edging plantings, and then the courtyard with multi-seating of the permanent versus the removable, and then the water fountain. And here is a perspective to show all of you that. So first the courtyard, Points Plaza open lawn, and then the Points Plaza strolling garden. And here is a perspective at eye level of the Points Plaza open lawn, just to showcase more so of this space where you can see the edging plants of hydrangeas and arborvitae, and how open it is so that large groups can be here, events can be here, people doing physical therapy that want to be outside can be here. And then here's a perspective of the utility building with the Starline Garden. As you can see, there are many colors that one would be able to see from inside the hospital in the higher levels of the views. And then at night, you would be able to see them as well and have more of a star-like light up, meaning with the name Starline Garden. And then here is a Points Plaza strolling garden perspective, just to give you another look at that and a more close-up look of how full it is of plantings. And then at the very end of my presentation, I will be able to show you two panoramas of the open lawn space in spring/summer, and then in winter, just to give this space a little bit more of something. Nextly, you'll see a construction detail of some permanent seating that I had done on this landscape. So in the right top corner, you'll see the Prairie View Garden, how there's permanent seating, ornamental grasses, and a water feature that will also be lit up at night. some perspectives from the triple knot garden. As you can see, with this permanent seating, with seating embedded into the wall, that corresponds with the freestanding block wall with seating detail. And then in the triple knot garden, there are 3 privacy spaces, and in the middle one, there is a water feature or a fire pit. It can be intermixed, and you can see that in the bottom right-hand corner perspective. And then next, I'll bring you to the emerald. Here's a section showing how they are broken up into privacy seating area, mass ornamental plantings that have eastern redbuds, birches, and other ornamental trees, and then a paver walkway, covered pergola walkway, and perennial plantings, so more of like specimen plantings for people to walk by and touch and smell and see, a water fountain, permanent seating area, and then a sheltered seating area like I mentioned earlier. And then we have a perspective more so for the secret garden, just so that you can see everything, how detailed the water feature is, how the sheltered seating actually looks, and then what you would be able to visualize when walking under the pergolas. Here is a construction detail for the green roof layered section, just to show you all of the components that it takes into creating a green roof. It is not just putting materials on a roof and plantings and calling it good. There are a lot of things to make sure that the roof isn't damaged and that the plantings on top of it will survive. So there's filtration systems, many different layers of membranes in order to make sure that nothing necessarily penetrates those unless it is designed to, on top of aggregate and soil and turf and pavers and other things like that in order to make the green roof successful. And then I'll bring you over to the cloister garden. Here is a section showing a little bit of the strolling garden, paver walkway, children's play garden, Elizabeth cloister garden, and ornamental plantings, and then it will lead you into the sunroom conservatory. Just to give you a feel of what it would look like from the side with fall planting colors. So here's a perspective showing the Elizabeth cloister gardens that is connected to the children's play garden, which then plays into the cloister strolling garden with the water feature and covered walkways. There's a construction detail showing the pavers that I had chosen, which are mortar set pavers, and then all of the detail going into the ornamental hedges of the strolling garden. Here's a construction detail of the ornamental fence that you can see I have implemented all throughout the site, and a water feature underneath the covered walkway that is leading you from the strolling garden to the children's play garden and the cloister garden. And here is a perspective from inside the sunroom conservatory. As you can see, there's tropical plantings and specimen plantings in order to make this experience completely different than on the outside, where you would mainly see only plantings that would grow in North Dakota or up in this region. And here is a winter view of the sunroom conservatory and a little bit of the cloister garden. As you can see, we do live in North Dakota, so that means that it is winter time a good chunk of the year, and so in order to make sure that these spaces can be utilized year-round, for sure the sunroom conservatory can be used. And that is the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions?